The western coast of the United States, an inviting destination that compelled the migration of generations of human travelers. They came here for the mild climate and scenic beauty, for the mountains and the seashore, for the opportunity to live a rich and fulfilling life. But there's more. You see, the geology and topography of Earth have provided reasons for the movement of populations. Geologic history is a control on human history. Accessible natural harbors, port sites, and offshore fisheries that drew many early settlers. Rich topsoil trapped over millennia in the deep basins encouraged agricultural activity, and the warming below the surface of decaying vegetation and organic materials over millions of years created great subterranean reservoirs of oil. We are also a daring species. We build and rebuild with little regard for the shifting earth beneath our feet, creating marvelous structures that give us the illusion of permanence, yet we tend to ignore the historical and scientific evidence that this is earthquake country. The same earth movements that trigger earthquakes created these mountains. The rupture along a fault during a single earthquake does not form much topography, but a broader geologic view reveals that thousands of earthquakes over millions of years uplifted mountains and downdropped basins and gave Los Angeles its distinctive topography. For example, when we view all of California and Baja California, we see that the transverse ranges of Los Angeles have an east-west orientation. But all of the other topographic features have a north-south orientation. The Sierra Nevada, the Great Valley, the Coast Ranges, the Peninsula Ranges, the Gulf of California. Probably no one better understands the plate tectonic history of North America than Dr. Tanya Atwater. She can give us a good understanding of how the tectonic plates have moved and interacted over geologic time to form the topography of Los Angeles.
If we could come back 20 million years ago and check out this part of the rim of the continent, we'd see that there were no transverse ranges, no islands, no Los Angeles basin. All those features were formed during the great shattering and shifting of the rim of the continent as the San Andreas Fault was formed. About 20 million years ago, the Pacific Plate began scraping against the edge of North America. It began tearing off fragments of the Californias and carrying them away. The block that was offshore of San Diego was torn off, but not completely. While one end of it was carried offshore and up coast by the Pacific Plate, the other end was stuck, so that the block gradually rotated around into an east-west orientation. This rotated block became the Western Transverse Ranges, and the Los Angeles Basin, both onshore and offshore, was opened up in the wake of that rotating piece. It would be a deep basin filled with ocean if it weren't for all the sediments that keep filling it in. About 5 million years ago, the Pacific Plate captured Baja California and Southern California, including the Los Angeles region. It began carrying them up the coast as well. As Baja California was pulled away from mainland Mexico, the Gulf of California formed in its wake. During that same motion, Southern California encountered the Big Bend of the San Andreas Fault. It was rammed up against it, pushing up the San Bernardino, San Gabriel, Santa Susana, and Santa Monica mountains. This process continues today. The Gulf of California is being pulled wider and wider, and the mountains of Southern California are being pushed up higher and higher.
And this means lots and lots of big earthquakes, because all the land west of the San Andreas Fault has been captured by the Pacific Plate and is moving with it, carrying Los Angeles, coastal California, and Baja California northward, heading toward Alaska. As the Gulf of California widens, the two plates pull apart and magma rises to fill the gaps between plates, then solidifies as new seafloor in the Gulf. The northern end of the Gulf is not at the shoreline. Rather, the Gulf extends northward beneath the cities of Mexicali and El Centro and on under the Salton Sea. And it is here, on the southeast side of the Salton Sea, that the San Andreas Fault begins, starting its 800-mile slice through California, all the way up to Cape Mendocino. San Andreas, the world's most famous fault. And what is the most famous earthquake? Probably the San Francisco quake. In 1906, the northern section of the fault broke loose and for 60 seconds simultaneously ruptured northward and southward. By the time the movement stopped, the ground had been ruptured for 265 miles, and this magnitude 7.9 earthquake had resulted in a northward horizontal movement of up to 20 feet. This violent shaking, along with the outbreak of fires throughout the city, destroyed buildings over a 400-block area. An estimated 5,000 people died during the quake and its aftermath. In 1857, the central section of the fault ruptured at its northern extreme, and the rupture front moved southward for nearly 3 minutes. When movement stopped, the ground had been ruptured for 225 miles. The west side of the fault moved northward as much as 30 feet horizontally. It was a magnitude 8 earthquake. Because the region was only sparsely settled at the time of this quake, the death toll amounted to just 2. But what about the southern section of the San Andreas Fault, extending from Wrightwood through San Bernardino to the Salton Sea? This section of the fault has not triggered a truly large earthquake in historic times, so how can we know when the last big earthquake occurred there, and just how big was it? We can estimate the magnitude and dates of prehistoric earthquakes by examining sediments at fault sites. Ponds receive sand and mud washed in by rain runoff and streams. The sediment settles to the bottom, forming layers, including dead pond vegetation. These layers of sediment may be disturbed by later fault movements. So, if we dig through faulted sediment in a trench, we see that the sediment was deposited in continuous, nearly horizontal layers, with the older, lower layers buried by upper, younger layers. Look at how this fault line has chopped and cut off the horizontal layers of sandstone and brown mudstone. By measuring the distance the layers have moved, we can calculate the magnitude of the ancient earthquake. The larger the movement, the larger the earthquake. So what can this type of analysis tell us about the earthquake history of the southern San Andreas Fault? Well, the last 4 major earthquakes occurred roughly 250 years apart. However, the last of these 4 was more than 310 years ago, roughly around the year 1690. The fault here has accumulated enough stress to move 20 feet, creating a magnitude 7.5 earthquake. If the fault movement continues rupturing northward, it will pass through heavily populated areas like San Bernardino. Another major quake is imminent because this section of the fault last moved in 1812 and retains some 14 feet of unreleased stress. A combined movement of these 2 fault segments will generate a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. And if the movement continues even farther, into the Mojave Desert, it will release another 15 feet of accumulated stress. So the combined movement of the 3 segments could trigger a magnitude 8 earthquake. The message given by the rock record is quite sobering. The San Andreas Fault is poised to move. A magnitude 8 earthquake could occur within the city limits of San Bernardino today, or next year, or 30 years from now. When a big earthquake shakes our houses, we feel it directly. But another great concern is the cutting off of our lifelines by the fault movement. The residents of Southern California live on imported water, and the aqueducts that supply this water cross the San Andreas Fault several times. Our natural gas flows through pipelines that cross over the San Andreas Fault. The power lines that deliver electricity to industries and our homes cross over many faults. And we rely on a system of highways that has numerous vulnerable spots where earthquake damage can severely disrupt ground transportation. The northward movement of Southern California is restricted where it collides with North America at the Big Bend. This collision causes the region to split into parallel blocks separated by parallel faults. In the east, it's the San Andreas Fault, then the San Jacinto Fault, then the Elsinore Fault, the Newport-Inglewood Fault, the Palos Verdes Fault, and the San Clemente Fault. Each of these faults has its west side moving north, and each generates earthquakes with magnitudes in the 6s and 7s. Now let's look at the north-south faults cutting through the Los Angeles region. The San Jacinto Fault passes close alongside elevated interchanges for Interstates 10 and 215 and lies due east of those towering structures. And the San Jacinto Fault slices through San Bernardino until it merges with the San Andreas Fault west of Interstate 15 in Cajon Pass. The Elsinore Fault features a pronounced cliff west of the cities of Temecula, Murrieta, and Lake Elsinore. At any time, this fault could generate a magnitude 7 earthquake. Note also that Lake Elsinore is shaped like a rectangle. The lake basin is the product of two faults in the Elsinore zone. Observe how the area between the two faults stretches and pulls apart by fault movements. The land drops into a natural basin and fills with water to become Lake Elsinore. The Newport-Inglewood Fault has created a linear string of hills and mesas all along the western edge of Los Angeles, including Cheviot Hills, Baldwin Hills, Rosecrans Hills, Dominguez Hill, Signal Hill, Alamo Heights, and Bolsa Chica Mesa. All of these features were formed by active faulting. Think of each hill as a miniature example of the forces that created the mountains at the Big Bend of the San Andreas Fault. Look at how the area between the faults is pushed together by the fault movements. Compression at a fault bend squeezes the land upward, forming features like Signal Hill. Fault movement here in the 1933 Long Beach earthquake killed more than 100 people. The compression of fault movements that squeeze hills upward also contort rocks thousands of feet beneath the surface, pushing and warping layers of sandstone and mudstone into structures that can trap natural gas and oil. There is indeed a definite relationship between earthquakes and oil in Los Angeles. Yes, faults may trap oil underground, but these same faults may cause earthquakes. The Palos Verdes Fault passes under the Vincent Thomas Bridge, then knifes across the Palos Verdes Peninsula, where it has lifted up the Palos Verdes Hills. We've been looking for the most part at north-south oriented faults and their horizontal movements to the north. These northward movements push Southern California against the Big Bend of the San Andreas Fault, causing it to fold, buckle, and deform. But these same northward movements also cause the rocks to fail, snap, and break in brittle movements, producing powerful earthquakes. This introduces another type of fault, the east-west oriented thrust faults. Along the Sierra Madre-Cucamonga fault zone, the San Gabriel Mountains are rising. Along the Santa Susana Northridge fault zone, the Santa Susana Mountains are rising. And along the Santa Monica Hollywood fault zone, the Santa Monica Mountains are rising. The Hollywood Fault is part of the fault system elevating the Santa Monica Mountains. It runs along the north side of Hollywood Boulevard and angles west towards Sunset Boulevard. The fault helps lift up the mountains while simultaneously moving westward and carrying the Hollywood sign toward the ocean. The Hollywood Fault is roughly 9 miles long and 10 miles deep. When the entire fault ruptures, its average movement could be about 5 feet, and this will create a magnitude 6.6 quake, an event similar to what happened in Northridge. That magnitude of quake in the heart of Los Angeles will cause much death and destruction. The Hollywood Fault stops at a point near the intersection of Sunset Boulevard and Rodeo Drive. Any rupture activity could move over to other faults, including the Santa Monica Fault. a fault that could generate a quake in excess of magnitude 7. Petroleum geologists have known about all of these faults for decades. They have drilled through them searching for trapped oil. But do we know if these subterranean faults are ancient or active? Do they still move and create killer earthquakes? Indeed, they do kill. In 1925, it was a magnitude 6.8 earthquake near Santa Barbara. In 1971, it was a magnitude 6.7 in the San Fernando Valley. In 1987, it was a magnitude 5.8 near Whittier Narrows. And in 1994, it was the magnitude 6.7 Northridge earthquake. It's 4:30 a.m. on a Monday in Los Angeles, the 17th of January, 1994, a holiday in honor of the birth of Martin Luther King Jr. Suddenly, a blind thrust fault ruptures below the surface. The fault pushes upward 11 feet to the north in a magnitude 6.7 earthquake. San Fernando Valley isn't just shaken, it's both uplifted and shaken. Buildings fail, parking garages collapse, bridges buckle, brick buildings become rubble, hillsides slide, gas lines rupture, fires break out, water pipes break, electricity distribution is disrupted. Construction codes to ensure structural integrity of buildings during ground motion are insufficient in many areas. Damages will exceed $20 billion, 9,000 people will be injured, 57 will die. A sobering event, but had the earthquake happened during working hours, when schools, stores, and offices were occupied, the death toll would have been much higher. This magnitude 6.7 earthquake occurred next to the magnitude 6.6 San Fernando earthquake in 1971. Both were thrust fault movements. It is probable that more thrust fault movements will occur in your lifetime. We're here at the Church of the Angels in Pasadena to visit a leading expert on seismic waves and earthquakes, Dr. Lucy Jones of the U.S. Geological Survey. She also is an expert on sound waves. What a beautiful piece of music. What are you playing?
This is a small study piece for viola da gamba. It's a Renaissance string instrument that I play. As funny as it might seem, what I'm doing here in playing this instrument is a lot like the process in creating an earthquake. I take some string, put it against another string, and have a frictional resistance. I'm pushing down, it's sticking. When I push hard enough, I overcome the friction, and I slide along and release energy that makes the air vibrate. It's a lot like what goes on in an earthquake. You need to have the friction between the strings. If I went and put the wood side down, I don't do as good a job of creating that frequencies, creating that energy as I do when I have a lot of friction. We even add rosin to the bow to make it stick even more and do a better job of generating the waves, generating the sound. There's other things that we can look at that really look the same between this instrument and what goes on in an earthquake. For one thing, notice I'm producing a pitch. Well, that pitch means that I've got a certain frequency to the wave. And if I have a lower pitch, I have a slower frequency than I do on the high pitch, where I've got a higher frequency. Earthquakes produce a wide range of frequencies as well. What controls the frequency that I'm putting out? Well, if I have a longer string, I get a lower frequency than if I have a shorter string. So the length of the fault controls some of what the frequencies are that are released. If I have one type of material in steel, I get a different material, a different frequency than with the gut material. So the material of the string helps control the frequency as well. Same thing goes on in the earth.
A fault rupture measuring the length of a football field will yield a magnitude 4 earthquake and high-frequency seismic waves. A 60-mile-long fault rupture will produce a magnitude 7 quake with lots of high-frequency seismic waves, but also lots of low-frequency seismic waves. Seismic waves have different frequencies And buildings also have different frequencies. Tall buildings swing wide and long in low-frequency vibrations. Short buildings shake at a rapid rate as they vibrate at high frequency. The fact is that seismic waves are modified, actually distorted, by the rocks they pass through. When seismic waves pass from harder into softer rocks, they slow down. This slowing means they must increase their amplitude to transport the same amount of energy. During earthquakes, the shaking tends to be stronger where seismic waves move slower, but with greater amplitude. Some of the down-warped basins in the Los Angeles region are more than 4 miles deep. Over time, the basins have filled with sand and mud washed into them by streams. Here is an image of the Los Angeles region with the hard rocks shown in a dark brown color and the soft rocks shown in yellow. Remember, the softer rocks will shake more during a big earthquake. Here the imagery depicts variations in the amplification of shaking throughout the Los Angeles region. The purple areas experience the least amplification of shaking, and the yellow areas have the greatest amplification. The point is, shaking is greatly amplified in soft rocks, and shaking is amplified the greatest where the softer rocks are the thickest. Notice the athletes playing basketball, the golfers taking their shots on a putting green, and the couple enjoying a peaceful walk in the park. Then, suddenly, a magnitude 8 earthquake breaks loose, and the ground shakes violently for 90 seconds. Out here, in the open, how dangerous is it for you? Get this, in an open area like a park, there is no danger. That brings up a significant point. Earthquakes don't kill, buildings do. Yes, it is our own human-built structures that fall apart and kill us. The question is, what can you do now to prevent losses before the next big earthquake sends powerful seismic waves chasing after you? We're here at a residential construction site because this is where America lives, in houses. And if you live in an earthquake-prone area like Los Angeles, you want to make sure that the builder is providing earthquake safety for your family. Well, how can you tell? Interior walls not only provide the separate spaces for us to live in, they also add shear strength to a house, the ability to stand up to earthquakes. Walls connect roof to floor, they connect exterior wall to exterior wall, they add strength to a house. What can you do to make older houses stronger? This model is a basic demonstration of a house with strong walls and strong roof that creates a protective shell for living and working. But how will this protective shell react when shaken by seismic waves? For instance, a Rayleigh wave. As Rayleigh waves travel in backward rotating circles, they cause the ground to accelerate through a vertical lift, a horizontal push, a vertical drop, and a horizontal push in the opposite direction. This simple building can easily handle the vertical lift and drop, but how well will it stand up to horizontal accelerations? Can it take a sideways push? Seems our house just collapsed. How can we make this building stronger? First, we can add cross bracing. We add cross braces to tie the wall and roof more strongly together. Then we'll securely bolt the cross braces to the walls and to the roof. Now, our building has the shear strength necessary to handle the accelerations brought by seismic waves. A closer look at the construction reveals that the wood frame walls are nailed, bracketed, and bolted together, vertically, diagonally, and horizontally to increase structural strength. Further, the walls are bolted to the foundation, are strapped to each other, and are fastened to the roof. The wood frame is covered by plywood that fits together to form continuous walls that add more shear strength. The plan is to provide support to the house in the event a quake causes it to move in all directions. Do this to your house. Brace it, nail it, bolt it, bracket it, strap it. This house has a concrete supporting wall and a wooden cripple wall between the concrete wall and the house itself. This presents possibilities for structural failure. The cripple wall can collapse, and the house can fall off the concrete wall. How can this failure be prevented? By increasing interior support. Cripple walls should be bolted to the foundation, and plywood panels can be added to reinforce the cripple wall. While many older wood frame houses may ride out an earthquake, their brick chimneys are danger points. Because of the rigid brick and mortar construction, these chimneys have little flexibility to roll with the seismic waves. Danger also lurks inside your home. 4 of the deaths and many injuries in the Northridge earthquake occurred inside homes as personal furnishings fell. Many billions of dollars of damages occurred inside houses. Let's go inside. Unsecured gas flame water heaters, shelves with heavy pots, books, stereo speakers, chandeliers hanging over dining tables, ceiling fans hanging over beds, unsecured large screen TV sets. Look inside your house and locate dangerous items. Then move them or securely fasten them, and do it now. Your actions will make a difference. Reduce your losses by acting now. A big earthquake could happen here on any given day. And do we really know what the future holds in, say, the next million years? Well, the Gulf of California will expand ever wider. The mountains of Los Angeles will push ever higher. Los Angeles itself will move about 35 miles closer to San Francisco, and these movements will unleash tens of thousands of big earthquakes. Los Angeles today is indeed earthquake country, and it will remain earthquake country for at least the next 1 million years.